What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about video editing mistakes that make you look like a beginner. Yes, that is the topic we're going to be covering. If you're new to this channel, I'm Jack. I upload video production themed videos, whether it be filming, whether it be video editing, or whether it be showing you how you can actually make money in this field. Every single day I upload videos on this topic. So if you have not subscribed already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And without further ado, let's jump into the video. Okay, now first off, this is just going to be a list of a couple things that I personally noticed in other people's videos that just look super amateur and super beginner. Also, a couple of the things that I had to kind of unwire myself from using because I know other people perceive these things as super beginner. So yes, and a lot of these things are just people being lazy, just not really wanting to take their edit the extra step further, and overall it's definitely worth it when you do put in that extra effort to the edit and just make it a little bit more professional. And overall, just these are a couple things I would advise you not including in your edits and definitely polishing out. First off is the default templatey titles. This stuff is horrible, honestly. Like, unless you're brand new to the game and you really don't know how to create yourself a specific graphic in Photoshop, for example, or if you really don't have I guess a nice clean style of just, you know what I mean, using some nice title text or whatever, and you really start dabbling with these defaults, these templates or whatever, your edit and overall the quality of your edit can go drastically downhill when you use this sort of stuff, just because it's pre-made, you know what I mean? To anybody who actually edits the entire project, they're gonna look at this and it's gonna be a huge red flag to them, for example. You know what I mean? Just grabbing the default pre-mades out of any editor that you're using. For example, I'm using Premiere Pro. I'm sure I'm showing an example on screen right now of me just showing some cheesy things that are just included in the editor. Stay away from using anything that's pre-made. If you can, of course, there are different packs you can download for various effects that are presets and stuff like that. That stuff's cool, obviously, but in terms of this defaulty text, it definitely, in terms of your titles, try to steer clear from this stuff. Definitely looks pretty amateur. Just go with some nice, clean white text on the screen, or some nice, clean black text on the screen, or whatever color, just to contrast with the background of that text. Overall, simpler the better. The simpler you keep your edit, just the nicer things seem to flow and everything like that. And it really, the funny part about the editing, unless you're an extremely good editor, for the most part, when you start taking your edit to the more complicated, weird, advanced style of stuff, especially if you're using pre-makes, that can make the quality go drastically downhill when any other person who actually knows what they're doing looks at that edit and sees that you've just used pre-makes, especially in program pre-makes like the ones I've probably shown on screen right now that are available in Premiere. By the way, this is obviously not specific to any video editor, but I personally like Premiere the most, so I'm probably going to use that for the examples. But next up on the list that pretty much just makes your whole edit seem way more amateur is stretched out and laggy footage. Yep, and the way people go about doing this is by using the slow motion inside of a program. Now, personally, if you're gonna use the pre-made slow motions, I would 100% actually do it with the pen tool, or just actually create a series of keyframes right there with the actual time remapping or whatever, opposed to just going and actually going to the speed change or whatever. Because oftentimes if you've got a clip that's 30 frames a second and you try slow it down to like 60 or 100 frames a second, it has to create those frames, right? Those frames aren't there. So artificially, the program creates those frames and it looks really choppy because it's artificially putting those frames in there. They don't exist. You want to do it with the actual time remapping. That is going to actually give you a much nicer slow motion effect if you are going to actually use the slow-mo inside of the program instead of just shooting slow motion. For example, my camera, the Sony a6300, that can of course shoot slow motion. So if I really do want to do slow-mo stuff, I 100% shoot in slow-mo instead of artificially doing that, because like I said about the frames. Now, in terms of shooting slow-mo as well, shooting slow-mo is great because what's called speeding slow motion footage up, there are those frames there. For example, my camera shoots at 120 FPS when I'm actually shooting slow motion. So instead of there being 30 frames there to expand to 120, obviously it's already at 120, but if I wanted to take that 120 then down to 30, for example, and make it just a regular motion clip instead of being slow motion, that regular motion would look perfect, even better than normal, because it does have those frames there. So it can actually condense it down. It doesn't have to artificially make up these frames, right? So definitely don't do the stretched out slow motion. It's looking laggy, it's looking really bad, quite frankly. Next up on the list of stuff just making your stuff look beginner, man, is those cheesy effects like the lens flare. That's definitely the one I'll use as an example. You know what I mean? The lens flare looks terrible. Unless I guess you're using it in a dope way, or you're creating your own, or you've got other presets or whatever, but that's just an example as well. Any cheesy effect is gonna drive the quality of your edit down. Really down. And this definitely ties into my next point, but I mean pretty much just any cheesy effect that you're kind of on the fence about shouldn't really be included in your edit, unless maybe it's like a satire kind of thing where you're like editing it to be bad. And honestly, the way I feel about most of the effects in the actual preloaded effects or pre-made effects tab in any program are pretty much garbage unless you're using them really subtly, right? So for example, just a nice little bit of that effect where you're not full on showing kind of like the full effects of that effect. I'm using the word effect a lot. I might trip myself out, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. Oftentimes with video editing, unless you're a super VFX specialist and also really good at it, so it looks good, less is more in terms of the stuff that you do nice and subtle that you might not even realize that was an effect right there, but still something nice happens, right? Those are kind of, that right there is how you get people into the flow of your edit, and overall things just seem to be much smoother, much cleaner when you're not abusing these effects. I think pretty much all the effects on their maximum setting look really nasty, really disgusting, definitely not clean at all. Oftentimes I don't even use the effects panel, or like I said, if I do, I use it really subtly, but oftentimes I just try to do some cool effects on the clip by just duplicating the actual clip in question, right? And just making slight alterations so they combine to be one kind of cool looking clip. For example, duplicating your clip and slowing it down and changing the opacity down so it looks like kind of like there's a ghost thing going on. Or you could also, of course, do some sort of thing where you actually duplicate the clip and make the top clip bigger, much higher scale, right? And then chop it so that only a portion of the clip is that higher scale. Just little weird stuff that you don't even necessarily have to use a pre-made effect to actually achieve those effects. God damn, I've said effect a lot. Moving on, let's just move on because I've said effect too many times. And moving on is the bad transitions. This, maybe even more than the effects, makes your edit look just whack if you're using these bad transitions. Pretty much any pre-made transition, don't use them. Honestly, don't use them unless you kind of have a good reason to, I guess. Maybe if you're making a satire edit or whatever the situation may be. These transitions definitely drive the quality of your project down, especially really whack stuff like the page turn and all that stuff. I'm sure I'm showing all this nonsense on screen right now, but definitely steer clear of all these right here, unless you're doing them super quick where they're not very noticeable. For example, I use kind of like a screen wipe transition along with like a little like swoosh sound effect. I'm sure you see it throughout this video, throughout all my videos. Very clean, but this particular transition right here is actually a pre-made transition. However, it is just on for such a short period of time that you just see like a swipe across the screen really quick, and then that right there is actually an effective use of the pre-made transitions. But bad pre-made transitions, or just bad transitions in general, that's definitely a no-go. If you can recreate your own transitions, that's super dope. Overall, steer clear of these bad transitions. They're not helping anybody's edit out at all, or your YouTube videos. Finally on the list, guys, I would say that this is some general tip, which if you haven't clocked onto this, you're definitely a beginner, so no wonder you're being perceived as a beginner, and these are mistakes you're making that make you look like a beginner, because my next tip right here is not syncing your projects, right? So obviously it does depend on what type of edit you're making. If you're doing an interview, you don't need to sync the B-roll footage on screen to the dude's voice or whatever, you know what I mean? That's ridiculous. But Personally, for me, the type of videos I make club movies, right? So I go to the club pretty much damn near every weekend, film the video and create an after movie for that particular club. Now, obviously, that style of videos is the type of stuff I'm talking about. If you're doing a proper style edit, everything should be synced. You wanna make sure that if you're making kind of like a montage, compilation sort of video almost, right? Which is essentially kind of what the videos I'm making are. You definitely want every single clip to be changing on the beat. This is gonna add like a seamless feel to your edit, and overall that's just mandatory. I'm sure you can understand the value in syncing up your clips to the beat to make everything flow a little nicer. I don't really need to elaborate too much onto there. Definitely be syncing your stuff up. But anyways, these are just a few general tips on how to actually not make so many mistakes, or overall just video editing mistakes that people are making that make you look like a beginner. Hopefully we're gonna see no more of this, right? Anyways, I'm ItsJackCole. I hope you guys enjoyed another video. If you made it to the end, consider subscribing. You know what I mean? I'm glad you made it to the end without subscribing. That shows my shit's kind of interesting at least. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and goodbye.